Welcome back, everyone, to the Mythicism Milwaukee show. The date is January 15th. Today we're joined in the audience by Bryce Blankenagel from the Naked Mormonism podcast. Did I get that, Bryce?
Well done. Thank you for inviting me, gentlemen. It's
Absolutely.
a pleasure to see you.
We love having you in the studio. Now, we did want to start off with the fantasy football, the atheist fantasy football results. So I'll let Brian and Jason take it away.
Right. We were in a atheist fantasy football league with Noah Illusions, Heath Enright, Thomas Smith, Andrew Torres, and was it Mark Namu? Mark Nebu, yeah.
Among others.
Among others, our team, what would Muhammad Sanu? Right, kind of funny. There is a guy named that.
Give you a charity chuckle.
Was quickly reduced to the consolation bracket where we got 5th or 6th place because there wasn't a third game. So they have us at 9th. That's bullshit.
That's wrong.
5th or 6th. No Illusions won that again at your Beckham call. Another pun reference versus I think Thomas Smith's Art Vandalays team of importer-exporters won the finals. We got screwed. We're going to be back next year, though, with an even cooler team name and a better team.
I just want to say I'm disappointed in you two.
We were everyone's good luck charm.
Yeah.
If you wanted to score like 200 points, play us.
What was our final record, Jason?
Final record, I think 4-10.
4-10.
I'm really okay. So anytime I'm at Brian's house, he has Sports Center on or some form of sports on, and I'm just going to say I'm disappointed in you, Brian.
Well, I mean, if we would have won the championship, I could have said, it was the grace of God, but it was God's will that I'm taught a lesson to be humble here.
I'm just kidding. Hey, 9th place or 5th and 6th, as you guys are saying, it's not too bad.
Well, we won both of our consolation playoff games. They just don't take that into account with the ranking.
But they should.
Yes, they should.
They should.
Yeah. So we were just in Chicago on Friday nights, and Bryce was there as well. They had the God Awful Movies and Cognitive Dissonance live show, which was fantastic.
About 300 people there. And,
about 300 people in Chicago theater. I forget what the theater was, but it's right on Lincoln Avenue. The movie was The Right to Believe, which I actually went and watched after. Yeah, I actually went and watched the movie after the event, and yeah, it was as bad as they said. But that should be up, right? They should have that posted soon. I think they were posting.
It comes out on Mondays, so I don't know when this will be coming out, but yeah, it should be up.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it was a fantastic event. Bryce took the train up from Chicago to Milwaukee to join us in studio, and really excited.
Yeah. It was really good. I mean, I thought we were going to watch the movie. We didn't watch the movie, but they did such a good descriptors of everything that was going on that you felt like you watched it.
Oh, well, and I was almost expecting them to show little clips of it. Like when they reviewed Passion of the Christ, I think that was their first live show in New York. They showed little clips of it so that the audience could understand what they were talking about. But they painted a great picture.
I think so,
I mean,
yeah.
it's not like
really
were really missing out on anything.
Right, right. And Eli in his wrestling suit and all
balls out.
the miming. Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that suit was tight for even Nacho Libre. I mean, that was a tight suit.
Right. Yeah. So if you missed it, well, there might be some pictures out there. I don't know.
I hope not.
I hope. Yeah. And the one exciting thing, the development that came is from that is that Noah Illusions and it sounds like Eli Bosnick both plan on being at the conference on September 30th in Milwaukee. So
we're hoping.
Hoping they come, and Bryce, hopefully you can make it out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, right now I don't have anything else planned in September, so why not? Right?
Man, they are funny guys. I mean, when they review that piece, at one point there was some guy with a gun. He was going to shoot like the gay guy, or thinking about shooting the gay guy in this coffee shop. And he goes, meanwhile, there's this old lady just flipping, kind of noticing what's going on, but flipping through her stuff. And Noah goes, man,
there's no reaction.
That old grandma has seen some shit because she's not even fazed by
And that is 100% true. I saw the movie, and that's exactly what happened. No reaction. So, it'd be great to have them in Milwaukee for the Myth Information Conference. For the marketing will be up probably in a couple of days.
It's still in the work, but save the date on September 30th.
A lot of guests coming to that, yep.
All right, Bryce, the Naked Mormonism podcast, nakedmormonism.com. I checked out your Patreon, up to 131 patrons for $402 a month. Congratulations.
Awesome.
That's really good.
Thank you. Yeah, when I first started the podcast, I was driving a truck full time as well as doing the podcast, and equivocated in 90 to 100-hour weeks just because it took that much work to put the research in and then produce it. And I realized I cannot do this forever. One of these things has to give. And I was also, this truck driving job was also very physically demanding. So I figured, why am I working my body? Because the more I work it, the worse it gets. Why don't I try and work my brain? Because the more I work it, the better it gets. So I finally just said, all right, if you guys can get the Patreon up to a certain amount by this time, then I will quit my day job and devote all of my time to this podcast and put it out weekly instead of, semi-weekly. Bi-monthly, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And the patrons came through, and I have them to thank that I'm able to do it full time because it is just such a research demanding podcast.
Yeah. Right. Well, congratulations on that. It's definitely the American dream right there.
Yeah,
living
thank
the
you very
dream
much.
right now.
Yeah, and it's 402 an episode. I misspoke. I think I said month. But yeah, excellent job. It's well produced. I think up to about 44 episodes or so in that, give or take. So.
Yeah, so I have a couple of different types of episodes, so it's kind of confusing if you look through the backlog. There's 44 historical episodes. That's a historical timeline, which I call it the Serial Mormon History Podcast because episode 1 starts with the birth of Joseph Smith, and it goes chronologically from there. Because if you want to know about Mormonism, where do you start? You got to start with the birth of the founding prophet, right?
Right.
So as it progresses through episode 2, 3, 4, you get introduced to more characters with nicknames, and that the nicknames really help you to create a cutout of the person, an actual person that you see in your mind that's doing all these things. And then there are also special edition episodes, and those are like discussions with people or just random ramblings in Mormon headlines and news topics and stuff like that. So there's altogether, I think, 94 episodes up or something like that. So I've been doing it 2 years strong.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you can do it full time. You don't have to go door to door like Mormons do. You don't have to do the 10% revenue either. What is that? I'm blanking on that. What is it? The 10%?
The tithing. Yeah.
Tithing.
Yep.
Yes.
Law of consecration in Joseph's day.
Yeah. If you don't pay, they show up, right? Is that still?
Well, I mean, you just don't get to do stuff.
Okay.
I mean, or they don't let you go to the temple, which the temple is necessary in order to get to heaven.
Okay.
So if you don't pay your tithing, you don't get your temple recommend. You don't get to heaven. Simple as that.
Yeah. So are you still going to be eternally married? Isn't that how Mormonism works here?
Yeah, with my many, many wives, yes.
Yeah.
I have my own planet.
And your own planet, right.
Yeah,
right.
Just an eternal baby-making session, right? Sorry, I should ask if there's an explicit availability here.
Well, no.
You can't make babies in heaven, right? They have to be on earth.
Oh, no,
that's
you
the
can't.
whole. That's the foundation of Mormonism. Is
Right.
every one of us is a spirit that was literally ejaculated out of Elohim's ball sack.
Right.
I'm dead serious.
Right.
They think we are all spirit children of Heavenly Father and Mother.
Yep.
Physical spirit.
And those that have dark skin like myself, we are cursed because we didn't want to fight in the war against Satan, right? Or is that what it was?
Yeah, you're fence sitters, as they call them, as are handicapped people, apparently.
Right. Oh, interesting. I didn't know the handicapped people.
Yeah. That, or they're so blessed that they don't even have to worry about sinning because they're, mentally incapable of rationalizing. So they basically have a free pass to heaven. It depends on who you ask, really. But
so Stephen Hawking's either screwed or got it made.
Right, exactly. But I mean, he started out normal, but I mean,
Right.
somebody with ALS and he's not normal. No, that was a horrible thing to say. Horrible way to say it.
Right.
But Bloody Brigham Young. I call him Bloody Brigham because he's just a horrible, demonic, like a Bond villain, but actually a real person and a far more horrible
Than Joseph Smith.
Yeah. Oh, far and away.
Brigham Young is kind of second in command after Joseph, right? Is that how the timeline works?
At some point, actually, after they get out of Liberty Jail in 1838, the church was founded in 30. When they leave Liberty Jail in 39, that's when Brigham Young really starts to come into his own as a trusted second in command. But up until that point, he was just another dude in the church. But he did say from the pulpit in Utah in, I want to say 1857 or something, or maybe 61, he said, if anybody mixes their seed with the seed of Cain, then the penalty is death on the spot.
Okay.
So if any white people marry any black people, they'll instantly die.
Interesting.
Yeah. I've never seen it happen. But, I mean, a prophet spoke it from the pulpit, so it's got to be true.
Right. And Cain being Bigfoot, as we'll learn in the myth of the day later, Cain was Bigfoot. So how does that work?
Well, so Mormons believe that Cain was cursed and destined to walk the earth. I think that's biblical teachings anyway, right?
Well, he was kicked out of the Garden of Eden and into a city, which I thought was ironic considering, they were like the first people on earth. But so kicked to a
somehow
city.
they married women that supposedly wouldn't have existed at that point. But
Yeah, I don't know how that really works out. So it wasn't pure incest. Bummer.
All of a sudden it's like Adam and Eve and then Cain and Abel, and then all of a sudden there's all these other people.
Yeah. Well, Seth too, but
Seth,
still,
correct.
Right. There's some city that he gets put, but I thought that so you're saying it's the seed of Cain, but many times that it's Ham, one of the three sons of Noah, like Seth or Japheth and Ham, that's where the descendant, they were the cursed black people. So is Ham then also the seed of Cain?
They think that Ham somehow survived the flood essentially, and Cain survived the flood, and then he passed the curse through Ham, but that Cain is still alive and wandering. The Mormons also believe that there are 3 Nephites that are still alive and wandering. Personally speaking, my great-great-great-grandfather joined the church in 1835. His name was Abraham Palmer, and he was somehow convinced that one of the 3 Nephites sat down on a boat with him and had a Bible bash session, essentially.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
wandering around then. So this is kind of, they have that in common with like the 12er Shia Islam, that, there's this hidden Mahdi somewhere, that's just hidden, but it'll come back. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they think, eventually the curse of Cain will be lifted, which apparently happened in 1978 for various social and political reasons, in my opinion. I mean, I did a 4.5-hour episode talking about it because the information is so dense about how racist the Mormon church is. It's horrifying.
Well, it wasn't until the 70s that black people are even allowed to be a part of the church.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. 1978, they couldn't get the priesthood until then. So essentially, the curse of Cain has been lifted. So I guess he can die now. So maybe Bigfoot's dead.
Well, I would love to see how the Mormons would find Bigfoot, considering we've had all these people out in the forest looking for him for years and decades, and the History Channel, and that'd be interesting to see did they have like a tracker on him or something?
Yeah, you would really hope so, but I don't think Mormons are too compelled by empirical evidence, regardless of what that means. Because, I mean, they also claim that the Hill Cumorah in New York, where Joseph, exhumed the plates from, was the battleground of 2 million people dying. Yeah. Literally fighting to the last person, which has never happened in any history before. No single battle has both sides completely exterminated another. Yeah. But it happened in the Book of Mormon, and apparently there are 2 million bodies with chariots and armor and swords and all kinds of cool stuff buried
both sides
in
completely
Cumorah.
annihilated, so they're
both sides, yeah. And then the Book of Mormon was passed down through Mormon, who was the translator at the time, and he passed it to his son Moroni. And on the top of every temple, you have this golden angel Moroni, because he was the final abridger, the final translator.
That's great. I mean, you have the Battle of Little Bighorn, and, Custer gets annihilated, but the Cheyenne Indians are, still alive. I mean, the Alamo, they get wiped out, but, Santa Ana Army's still around. So you're right. No sides get completely both wiped out.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it usually comes down to one side surrounding the other army and slaughtering them. Yeah. That's usually what happens, because warfare is one side overpowering the other and enforcing their will upon them. Mm-hmm. That apparently is not a thing in the Book of Mormon.
Right. Well, and this, I guess I wanted to get this from you, Bryce, based on your experience with the Mormon Church. When it comes to cognitive dissonance, when you're talking about the Abrahamic faiths, they go back. You have the 5th century, 6th century, Jesus, it's almost like the 1st, 2nd century. I can kind of understand why people take a lot of the teachings and the traditions on faith, because it's so far in the past that it's hard to get back to. I mean, we're constantly having arguments over, did Jesus exist? What was he actually doing? Blah, blah, blah. But when it comes to Joseph Smith, not only do we know he existed, but we also knew he was a con man. We knew he tried creating his own bank and his own currency that went bankrupt. We knew he owed a lot of money to a lot of people. We knew why he was killed, yet somehow this Book of Mormon that he wrote, that was revealed to him by Moroni and the golden tablets, right? People take that as, he's got to be telling the truth. How does that work? How does somebody, in the Mormon Church know the history and say, yeah, I totally believe in this con man's book that he wrote, and I want to live my life to those, morals? How does that work?
Well, quite frankly, you would have to ask one of them that believes in the church and knows the history. because I left the church when I was like 16, 17, but that was more out of apathy. That wasn't out of any philosophical internal debate or anything. That was just because I hated going to church. I didn't want to go anymore. After I left, a few years after, then I learned a tiny bit about the history, and I realized, that there's a wormhole there. I got to jump into that and see what's on the other side. And now the more that I read, the more I realize just how bullshit it really is.
Okay.
And I don't understand how people can reconcile that in their mind because it's so clearly bullshit.
How many people have to do it, though? In your community, how many do you think were as familiar with the history?
That's kind of a tough thing. Interesting enough, when you are in church, there's usually a couple of guys or girls in the church that are sitting in the back of the class or whatever, and they seem to know more about the church than anybody else. So when the person is giving like their gospel topics essay or a gospel doctrine class, or giving a lecture or talk or whatever, then the person from the back will try and shout from the back corrections or discussion topics or whatever, and it's always like, oh, that's the Mormon that knows about the church. And they always have this big ass Book of Mormon with huge margins where they have, tons of notes written out and stuff. So they're like this certain subgenre of Mormons that exist inside the church. But that's only a tiny percentage of them. The vast majority of Mormons do not even know that Joseph Smith used a rock to translate the fucking Book of Mormon.
Interesting.
Until the church released pictures of it.
Okay. So it is kind of analogous to Christians, to, culture. Well, Islam's a little different. I'd say more moderates, Muslims, they may not know the story. They know, what's the popular things. They know the traditions. They know what they're told, but they're not really going and looking at the evidence.
That's because they've been sold the cardboard cutout.
Okay.
The two-dimensional, just the hero of Islam. Same thing with Joseph Smith.
Right.
That's the Joseph Smith that people worship and sing praise to the man about, is the Joseph Smith that the church has created.
Okay.
But that is very few similarities with the real Joseph Smith that existed in history.
Can you cover some of those? I'd love to know what people think in the church, what Joseph Smith was compared to what he actually was in real life.
Well, interesting, in the church, they hardly ever talk about Joseph Smith's deeds specifically. They'll talk about like a profound moral lesson that he gave to somebody when they were, struggling in the church, or when somebody apostatized and came back, the speech that Joseph Smith or Brigham Young gave after they came back, like Thomas B. Marsh's case that I'm thinking of for that. But hardly ever do they talk about what Joseph specifically did, because it doesn't take much scratching of the surface to realize that there's something lying beneath, that there's profound holes in the historical Joseph that Mormons know. And once you uncover that, it's really hard not to get interested and dive in deeper. So the thing that I love the most about Mormon history is every time you hear something crazy in Mormon history, like Joseph Smith using a rock to translate the Book of Mormon, it goes so much deeper. You just keep peeling back layers, and just like an onion, it's making you cry the whole time. But like the stone that he used was actually stolen from somebody, and there was a controversy, and it was stolen from a fellow treasure digger named Willard Chase, and he used that stone. And then Martin Harris, who was the funder of the Book of Mormon,
right,
he tried to test Joseph Smith using that rock.
Right.
So they would go down to the, in between translating sessions, or just when they needed a break, they'd go down to a local stream and just go skip rocks and whatever. So one of these times, Martin Harris picked up a rock, and then when he got back in the house before Joseph, and he swapped out the rocks. He found one that looked like Joseph Smith's seer stone, right? But of course, that's magical stone because it's a seer stone. But the one that Martin Harris had, it's not magical.
Right.
So it's a forgery, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So Joseph, as the story goes, Joseph put the hat up to his head. He's been staring at this rock for years. By this point, he's going to notice an imposter immediately. But he says, Martin Harris said that Joseph was silent for minutes. And then he said, "Martin, what is wrong? All is as dark as Egypt."
Really?
And then Martin said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I switched out the rocks." And Joseph said, "Why would you do that? To silence the mouths of fools." So the Book of Mormon was translated with a rock that most Mormons don't know about, but it was a stolen rock, and it was a magical rock.
Yeah.
And then Mormon apostles today justify it by holding up an iPhone and saying that, God kind of used it like an iPhone. Joseph could read whatever God wanted him to through it.
Right. And that's how he would translate the plates. And then you have to look into the hat as well, like looking.
Yeah. And it says specifically that he had to put the hat around his face to exclude the light. And I have my own opinions about why that is specifically. I am of the opinion that Joseph Smith was heavily into using tinctures that were derived from Amanita muscaria or ergot or morning glory seeds or whatever, from many available hallucinogens that were around there. Okay. And when you are, so like Joe Rogan has a silence tank essentially for when he meditates, and it's essentially when you put yourself into a room without with complete sensory deprivation, your mind has to create stuff.
Right.
So if you're tripping balls and you want to see shit, you put your face in complete darkness.
Okay.
And if you have this really cool looking rock that has, cool waves through it, it's an awesome rock.
Yeah.
And your brain is hyped up on hallucinogens, you're going to see some shit.
Right.
Wow.
Well, the wife of forgive me, Morris, is that his name? The main funder of the Book of
Martin. Yeah, Martin Harris.
Harris, sorry. So Harris's wife actually also took the first Book of Mormon and hid it, correct? Is that how the story goes? So Joseph Smith is translating the original Book of Mormon, and Harris's wife says, okay, I don't believe this, so let's take that book and hide it and see if he can do it again, because if it truly is divine, he should be able to do it again. Is that how the story goes?
That's pretty much exactly how it's told. I personally believe that Martin Harris was in on it as well, because he was trying to test Joseph multiple times. He tried it with the rocks, switching out the rocks. Why wouldn't he test him with the 116 pages? So what happened, they translated the Book of Lehi is what it was called. That was 116 pages. And Martin Harris took it to his wife. She hid it. And then, of course, that's a great empirical test. If Joseph can reproduce it word for word, it's obviously true.
Right.
He's obviously translating from something, from some actual plates. But when Martin Harris came back and told Joseph, he said, oh, the angel is wrong, mad with me. And, and he's taken away the power of translation for a season. I personally believe that Martin Harris had the pages stashed in his frock, and as soon as Joseph got a chapter in and it was word for word, he'd be like, all right, I was just testing you again, here's the 116 pages. But it never happened.
But you said they had found that original book.
So I was that was the conversation we were having on our way up here, and I was actually mistaken. I was misunderstanding what we were talking about specifically. I thought you were talking about the original manuscript that was taken by Emma Smith.
Yes, Emma.
It was exhumed by Emma Smith because Joseph buried the original manuscript in the cornerstone of the Nauvoo Temple. And it was exhumed, I think, about half a decade later, and only like 25% of it exists today because it was just water damage and weather being buried in the ground. It just destroyed the pages of it. And I'm actually affiliated with a project called therealbookofmormon.org, where there's a Book of Mormon comparative module. And you can look at the original manuscript combined with the 25% of the printer's manuscript. So the words as they actually came out of Joseph's mouth, written by Oliver Cowdery or Martin Harris or whoever, and compare it to the 2013 Book of Mormon. And if you include all the verse breaks, all of the spelling changes, all of the commas, all of the everything, there's well over 100,000 differences between the manuscripts. So it's incredible.
Do you know the story of the supposed book that went to a copyright at the time that Joseph was putting the Book of Mormon together? It was a story that had a lot of the same fictional like occurrences that are in the Book of Mormon. And it was at a copyright, and somehow like Joseph Smith worked for an editor or something, and this book was getting ready to get published, and then it went missing. And the idea is that Joseph took that book and then modeled the Book of Mormon after that clearly fictional book that was at this copywriter. Do you know of that story?
So what you're talking about is actually a subsect of Mormon historianship that has been maligned by the mainstream Mormon historians. It's called the Spalding theory. And what happened was this guy, Solomon Spalding, supposedly wrote this, what was called Manuscript Found. And he died in 1816, I believe it was, long before the Book of Mormon ever came out. But Sidney Rigdon, who was Joseph Smith's second in command after the missionary troop came down and miraculously converted Sidney Rigdon and his entire congregation, essentially, in Ohio. The theory proposes that Sidney Rigdon took that manuscript without anybody's knowledge, and then parts of that made their way into the Book of Mormon. Now, if you look at like 1st and 2nd Nephi, there are far too many autobiographical tones to claim that came from the Spalding manuscript.
Okay.
It's very, very clear that Joseph Smith wrote 1st and 2nd Nephi, and probably all the way up to Mosiah 1, as far as we can best understand. Mosiah 2, all the way to the end of the book, is the Book of Moroni, is vastly different. There's an immense number of differences that make it scream like there were multiple authors. And if one person, Joseph Smith, is staring in his hat and he is automatically writing this, as they called it back then, automatic writing, and he's, just talking this thing into existence to his scribe, you would expect to see a very similar tone, because the book was supposedly written essentially in 3 months. You would expect to see essentially the same authorship. You would see a little bit of development as they progress through, but you wouldn't see vastly different verbiage that you see in the Book of Mormon if it were all written by Joseph Smith. So I personally believe that there might be some merit to the Spalding theory, but the vast majority of actual Mormon scholars will just scoff and hand wave at it.
Interesting.
You guys know what that's about.
Oh, yeah,
Mythicist Milwaukee.
right. Yeah, the Bible isn't influenced by anything else, right?
Well, it sounds like he's like the religious L. Ron Hubbard, kind of creates a religion, influenced by sci-fi. But in this case, he's taking kind of more of a religious narrative. The 12 tribes of Israel, coming over before. Back into the Mormon history, there's a persecution narrative that's going on with the Mormons. So it starts in New York, but then you mentioned Ohio. So they're moving west. And why is that? Or do people just don't like Mormonism? Why do they have to keep moving west?
Essentially, Mormonism is what's called a Zionist sect. And a restorationism, as it's commonly referred to, was this huge following that was cropping up in the burned over district, and not just the burned over district, but it was a common ideal held throughout many religions that were throughout all of the new states.
Like a lot of religions were popping up at that time, right? This is like where a lot of the weird mystery religions or not as popular religions are popping up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a number of religions that still exist today, one of which is the Seventh-day Adventists.
There you go.
They came out of William Miller, and that William Miller prophesied that Jesus would come back in 1843 or 44 or something to that effect. I mean, they had multiple revelations about when Jesus would come back, because William Miller was using his own math to find out when this happened, and every one of them failed.
Yeah.
And eventually they just said, well, there was some war in heaven or something to that effect.
Right.
But Joseph Smith cropped up out of the same soup mix of religious wackiness that was going on in the area.
Right.
And I don't see much difference between his religious texts and those of Ellen G. White. I mean, really.
So was he forced west? I mean, did he want to go west, or was he forced? Or
yeah, that's where I was trying to go. I couldn't remember. Thank you. You re-railed the train. So there were multiple reasons why they were kicked out, but out of various places. New York was one of them. He had been arrested multiple times and convicted, and they were kicked out of Ohio because the leadership there became so opposed to Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon that they excommunicated them from their own church. So then they moved out to Missouri and essentially held their own court tribunal and said, you guys are following us, and we're not affiliated with anybody in Ohio anymore. And then after the Mormon-Missouri War, and Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon and a bunch of others are arrested, and they go to jail for 6 months, then they go up to Nauvoo. And they found Nauvoo. But at the heart of all of this is Independence, Missouri. And that is where, in 1831, Joseph Smith declared, this is Zion. This is also the Garden of Eden. This is where Adam and Eve were originally placed. And then when they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they migrated north to the northern county above Jackson, which is Daviess County, to a town called Adamon-Diamond. I don't know where the fuck this comes from, but he just manufactured it.
Why
but
not,
it
right?
all revolves around whatever this Zion place is, and it happened to be.
And it's not a
declared as
city
Jackson
in the
County.
middle of the earth, with a bunch of AI robots running around. Matrix joke.
Well, actually, Joseph Smith, I don't know if it was actually Joseph Smith, but he believed in a hollow earth theory where people live in the inside of the earth. So,
interesting.
I mean, that's not
Wow.
that's not an entirely
There's
irrelevant reference.
Your sci-fi
Wow,
reference
okay,
there. Yeah.
there you go.
So Adam and Eve were in the U.S. as well as Jesus. Like, right? Jesus
Yeah.
comes back to you. I don't want to get you off topic as to why they're moving west, but I didn't know Adam and Eve were also thought to be in the U.S. as well. That's interesting.
Yeah, the Garden of Eden. That's in Jackson County, Missouri.
Oh, there you go.
Not too far from here, right? About 6-7 hours.
Very interesting.
Yep. But I don't know how Mormons reconcile how they got over to Israel and became the cradle of civilization. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. And see, this is the problem. As soon as you scratch the surface and start asking any of these critical questions, the whole thing fucking falls to pieces.
Well, I guess the silver lining there is everyone's always upset that, we got kicked out of Eden. It'd be awesome to live in Eden. But I guess if it's in Jackson, Missouri, it's not too bad.
Exactly. Well, and they declared that there'd be a temple built there. Joseph came up with a revelation. There will be a temple here, and that square where he revealed this is Zion's temple, this is the temple, is still hotly contested by multiple Mormon groups that followed different Mormon leaders after Joseph died. So the lot that is Zion is actually owned by the Hedrickites, who do not have any of the funding or infrastructure that a multi-billion-dollar corporation like the LDS Church in Salt Lake City has.
I like how you put that.
But they have been hanging on to this little tiny plot of land since the 1920s, and it's been hotly disputed by multiple Mormon cultures ever since. I mean, it's crazy. The history of this one little block, this city block in the center of Jackson County, or Independence, Missouri, is stupidly contested for. And on one, across the street, you have the Community of Christ Temple, which is just massive. It's got this huge spire and it's beautiful. And then the Salt Lake City LDS Church has a visitor center there. And, there's like, they all try and encroach as much as possible on this because Mormons still believe that that's going to be ground zero for the resurrection. That's going to be where Jesus touches down, is in Zion.
Interesting.
Wow.
So
it's like our own Jerusalem.
It's in the middle of
our
Tornado
backyard.
Alley, so I mean, some things may touch down.
Yes, but they're going west.
yeah, it was essentially fueled by persecution. Eventually, anywhere that the Mormons settled became just far too cancerous to continue staying there. So finally, after Joseph died, Brigham was like, I'm going to go where there's nobody and make my own theocratic kingdom. And 1847, he led the first wagon train out to Salt Lake City and declared this is
Brigham
the right
Young,
place.
right?
Yeah.
No, Joseph Smith has been killed, I think, a year or two earlier, right?
In jail,
44,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Was it in jail or outside of jail or something?
He was actually in jail. He was shot like a rat in a cage, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it was this tinky little tiny Carthage jail. You can go tour it today. It's owned by the LDS Church, by the Salt Lake City LDS Church. I have to make that distinction every time.
Yeah.
But you can go tour it, and there's still apparently a blood spot on the floor from where Hiram Smith, his brother, was shot in the head. But Joseph was shot multiple times and ran to the window and gave the Masonic cry for help, which is holding up both of your hands to the square and saying, is there no help for the widow's son? Or, oh Lord, my God, is there no help for the widow's son? In hopes that his friendly Masons out there would come to his rescue. And he was shot multiple times, fell out of the window onto the ground, and then shot more. So he was just slaughtered.
It's a perfect poetic ending for a religion that was started in the U.S. You look at the ancient prophets, they ascend to heaven or whatever. Joseph Smith gets shot dead in jail.
Yeah.
That's perfect. That's a perfect
Gun
American
violence.
ending.
More than that,
It's always been around.
the best part about this is Mormons couch this as a martyrdom because their prophet was shot. He was incarcerated in jail. They don't realize that he was in jail because he'd burned down a printing press that was trying to publish a Mormon expose called the Nauvoo Expositor about his polygamy. The paper got out. You can read it today. There are still copies available today. You can hold a copy of it in your hand. And the thing is, in that Nauvoo Expositor, we can't find any factual inaccuracies. Everything that is discussed is essentially true. But Joseph sought burning it down because what other option do you have? So he was incarcerated for an act of tyranny, an act of treason against the First Amendment, free speech. So he was there for a reason. And also, it wasn't a martyrdom. It was a gunfight.
Yeah.
Somebody smuggled a gun into Joseph and Hiram the night before. Cyrus Wheelock, I think was his name. And he gave Joseph a 6-shooter and Hiram Smith a Derringer. Hiram didn't get his gun out of his pocket in time. Joseph Smith, as they were coming up the stairs in this little tiny corridor, this little hallway, there was a bunch of men against the door trying to stick their gun barrels through and shoot into the room that they were in. Joseph pulled out his pistol and stuck it out the door and blam, 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 blasted into the crowd as much as he could. 2 of the shots misfired and didn't shoot. He shot 3 people and 2 of them died.
I love how 2 of the shots didn't fire.
Right. But Joseph Smith, the founding prophet of the church, during his martyrdom, killed 2 men.
Jeez.
And nearly another.
Right. So this
like
isn't
Jesus
grabbing.
cross,
But this is Jesus grabbing Peter's sword.
Yeah.
Put it down. Heals the guy's ear. It's not the same.
Or he grabs the spear of destiny before he gets stabbed with it and stabs 2 people, and then that'd be interesting. But they're moving west, and I think there's even more American history tied into this. They're responsible for a genocide in a sense of the Native Americans as they are making their Salt Lake City home, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is a part of American history that we tend to write off.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's really
the Mormons
sad part.
killed the Native Americans. Well, so did everybody else that was settling and colonizing westward.
Yeah.
Well, the Mormons just so happened to move to the center of the heartland where westward moving was happening, right? The California gold rush was going on essentially in the 1860s, but one of the Utah was kind of like the trading post where people would stop and take off and head on down to California.
Oh, interesting.
So you had in I think this was 57, if I'm not mistaken,
the Utah
September
War.
11th, 1857. You have the Baker Fancher Party, which is a wagon train of 140 people, non-Mormons, heading out across the plains, and they traveled through Utah, through Parley's Canyon, through southern Utah, and they were on their way out to California. Unfortunately, somebody got it in their mind that these people killed an apostle who had been shot in, I believe, Kansas or Arkansas a few weeks before. They thought that they were affiliated with it, and they went to avenge the blood of the prophets. So that's known as Mountain Meadows Massacre, where Mormons slaughtered 120 men, women, and children.
Wow.
And we have detailed accounts of it because they thought if anybody under 5 years old experienced this, they weren't going to remember it, so they left them alive. But we have written accounts from those people, of a young boy like pulling arrows out of his mom's back and really tragic shit. But those are the white people. 120 men, women, and children, white people. That's terrifying. That's scary because that's religious terrorism on American soil perpetrated against Americans. But that says nothing about the thousands of Native Americans that were wholesale slaughtered. The Timpanogos Indians, the Mormons took over them. They were a tribe of, I think, about 300 to 400 people, and the Mormons slaughtered all of them and then cut off 40 to 50 of their heads and sent them to Columbia University to be studied. I mean, they just didn't give a fuck about them.
No,
it's horrifying. And then now we have Timpanogos Cave that's named after that Indian tribe that was slaughtered there. We also have the Wasatch Mountains, which are named after the Wasaki tribe. There was 400 men, women, and children there. The Mormons just slaughtered them all.
And we have Brigham Young University to commemorate that.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
And that's the thing about Brigham Young that so many Mormons don't understand. If they knew any of the shit that this guy did, they would try and distance themselves as much as possible.
Although we can't necessarily blame Mormonism for that because the whole white man's burden thing, move west, that was more of an American phenomenon, to be fair, right?
Colonialization.
Yeah.
To be fair, but when you are starting a religion, and I think that's where some people don't see religion in general, it's always the cause of terrible atrocities such as this, and somehow it keeps its divine name, and things need to happen because they need to. But I think it's a disgrace.
But so they get west in say 1847. So they beat the gold rush by a couple years. They arrive in Utah and immediately set up a state name called I always want to think it's Descartes, but it's not.
Yeah, it's Deseret.
Deseret.
The state of Deseret, yeah. And they had their own alphabet and their own money and all kinds of stuff.
Right. They continued to hold those meetings of elders and essentially run a rogue government until about 1870. And I think they at some point they get territory status.
It was I'm not sure when it was granted territory status, but Utah was granted a slave territory status as well.
Well, they were a state in 1896, so around 1840. It was like 46 years prior to that, so 1850 in that range. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, that's probably about right. When the Mormons were starting to settle in mass, that's probably when the government granted statehood. And I do have to say, this is another thing that's not talked about a lot in Mormonism. Is at one point we do have record that one slave was given to the church as tithing.
Interesting.
And he and Mormons that know about this story will say, well, Brigham Young released him 3 years later, so obviously, it was a good thing for this slave. But it's like, yeah, but somebody
3 years,
gave to
right.
your prophet a human being for tithing.
Right.
Well,
he
can't
was
really
cursed.
get past that.
He didn't want to fight in that battle against Satan, so whatever.
right.
3 years.
Yeah, he was a fence sitter. Let him burn. Who
Right,
cares?
exactly.
well, the Mormons are going to get caught up like in partial in the conflagration that will consume America in 1861, right? The Civil War. So it seems like people wanting the Mormon vote too. I mean, the Republicans are sort of courting them because they tend to be anti-slavery, but this whole polygamy thing's screwing things up. Jefferson Davis wants their vote as well, but he doesn't like the polygamy part because and it's funny to see how the politicians are both pandering to them and kind of like manipulating them at the same time.
Well, and I find it interesting because Brigham Young had his own political motivations. He was trying to get Utah as a legit state, trying to gain statehood and be held on the same level with everybody else. But they were given the twins of barbarism. You can't have slavery and you can't have polygamy. When you get rid of those, then you can get statehood.
I think that's a quote by Lincoln.
So long.
Is what he would call the remnants of barbarism.
Yeah, that makes sense. But when the Germans attacked the Russians in World War II, I can't remember who it was, but he sent a cigar to Winston Churchill saying Hitler's attacked the Russians on the Eastern Front, essentially because it was so exciting that now Hitler had two fronts to fight the war on, right? He was going to be distracted so much with what was going on the East Front that essentially he wasn't going to pay as much attention to the gentlemen's fighting that was going on in Europe.
It sounds like a de Gaulle thing to do, but go on.
The same thing happened with Brigham Young, essentially. As soon as the Civil War broke out, Brigham Young was elated because he was under scrutiny at the time. There were multiple troops that had multiple battalions that had marched out into Parley's Canyon, where Brigham Young had sent them back, essentially, because he had fortified the canyon with forts and soldiers, and it was going to be death row for him. If you march through Parley's Canyon, you see what it is. It's a bottleneck.
So is this in the 1857 war, like where they were kind of confronting the American troops or the guys that were sent in?
Yeah, so there were certain things that were going on that would like spike the pressure, spike the conflict between them and cause the president at the time to send troops
Buchanan,
out or whatever.
right.
Yeah, Buchanan to send the troops out to Utah to confront Brigham Young, but he didn't want that. That's bad press. That's really bad for business. He was a savvy businessman, a shrewd investor. So anything that would happen that would reduce Buchanan's or Lincoln's focus on Utah, he was elated about. So
Interesting. As I mentioned earlier, we were going to learn more about Cain being Bigfoot, so let's kick it over to Antonio for today's myth of the day.
I can't wait for this one.
Thank you, and this is the myth of the day. In 1835, one of the Mormon Church's 12 apostles, David Padden, claimed that he encountered Bigfoot walking along the side of the road. He wrote, quote, "He walked along beside me for about 2 miles. His head was about even with my shoulders as I sat in my saddle. He wore no clothing, but was covered with hair. His skin was very dark," end quote. The Mormon myth states that Bigfoot is actually Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve. Cain, after killing his brother Abel, was cursed by the Mormon God and consigned to be a fugitive and vagabond, and a mark or curse was placed upon him that would reveal his identity. This is still accepted by Mormons today, and that is our myth of the day.
Thank you, Antonio, for that very informative myth of the day.
I always learn new stuff on this show.
Man, the time is just flying by here. We have about 10 minutes left. I think we're going to do a part 2 on Bryce's show.
yes, I like that a lot.
That'd be awesome. I think we can get more into his history stuff. But some of the concept I wanted to cover, the magic underwear. Now, I think a lot of the listeners may know. I don't know. Maybe they don't. It could be wrong. But the Mormons actually wear magic underwear. There's an industry for magic underwear. There's
and a black market.
There's a black market. I got to hear about
MormonSecret.com.
Oh man, I got to hear.
And they
about
also
this.
run Mormon girls and Mormon boys Twitter handles, which are garment porn.
So there literally are like textile plants creating this magic underwear. So can you tell
If
us?
it's a thing, there's porn for it.
Yeah, what is the magic underwear? Why is it important? And where did this thing start?
So the magic underwear goes straight back to Masonry. They even have Masonic symbols stitched into the breasts and the left knee, the compass and the square. Essentially, so unfortunately, my own personal studies, I'm studying at the same pace that I'm producing the podcast. So currently we're studying in 1838, and the whole time up to that. Joseph Smith gets involved with Masonry in about 42, 43-ish, through his brother. I don't know exactly when the underwear was implemented, but Mormons today believe that it's bulletproof and fire protection, and it's essentially you have to have your garments
Protect you from the devil too.
And also adultery, too, because if you start, getting a little frisky or something, it's like, hang on, let me take off my garments and let's get this started. It's like, oh, well, yeah, boner killer, right?
Right,
So-
yeah. Nothing ruins the mood than silly underwear, right?
Yeah.
Well,
and
some
I
find
love how
it
it's called
experience.
magic underwear. Like, couldn't you come up with a better term at that point? Maybe like Joseph Smith underwear or like Haynes
no
by him.
Mormons call it
Yeah. It was,
the Joseph Klein series.
Yeah, right. The
Yeah, I don't
Golden
know.
Plate series.
No Mormon today calls them magic underwear.
Okay.
They're garments.
They're garments.
The garments, and they're very sacred. People don't talk about their garments.
Okay.
That's you can see the outlines when Mormons are wearing them because they have a very distinct outline on the collar.
Okay.
For the women, they cover the shoulder. So, and the rule is you cannot have your garments showing ever. So you have to wear clothing that covers your garments. So your shorts will come down to your knee. The garment bottoms come down to your knee, so you always have to wear shorts or a skirt that's longer than your knee. And same with sleeves for women; they can't wear anything that's sleeveless because the garments cap over their shoulder a little bit, so they have to have sleeves all the time.
So the garments are kind of like Fight Club. You just don't talk about it.
Yeah, right. Right. And the second rule: you don't talk about it.
But okay, and in the Book of Mormon, like it talks about too, like the spooky Mormon hell dream. Is that accurate? I mean, Did you have one of those?
Yeah.
And do any of your friends?
Many times I saw, Starbucks cups dancing around with demons. No, I mean, I didn't have a lot of the really heavy brainwashing indoctrination that a lot of people went through. I personally never had to deal with any like hell nightmares or outer darkness or demonic thoughts or anything like that. But I've talked to many people who have. It's a real thing.
So what is that? I guess I missed it.
It's essentially everything that's bad for Mormons. It's the spooky Mormon hell, and yeah, the most significant part that I remember is those dancing Starbucks cups because they don't drink coffee.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
No
the
coffee, no
things that-
soda, no
Things that are allowed.
smoking.
Yeah, I think a bunch is made of like turn it off too. That maybe you don't talk about your underwear, but you also don't talk about things like gay thoughts. Right, just turn it off.
Yeah, turn it off. Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Put it in a box and you crush it.
Yeah, and
exactly.
I know we're having fun with some of these things because they are funny, so it's funny. I think I like having fun with funny things, but there are some real consequences for people in the polygamous camps. A lot of times the men, the children, the boys are excommunicated from the where they live, their families and everywhere, and
The Lost Boys.
Yeah, the Lost Boys, and they've actually created little areas near where their houses were, but they can't ever go back home. Do you know anything about this, and can you tell us about that?
I've had a fairly limited exposure. I've had a couple people on my podcast that came from different fundy sects. The fundamentalist LDS, that's what it is, FLDS. They call them fundies.
Okay.
And I had somebody on named Chuck, and he's the host of the Irreligiosophy podcast. I don't know if you guys listen to that.
Yeah.
It's a great one. Jason's nodding his head over there. And then I had on somebody named Esther Palmer, who grew up in Canada, and she grew up in I think it's called Bountiful Canada, and she had, I think it was 9 kids and a couple sister wives, and she came on and talked for almost 2 hours about how fucked up it really is inside of
and these are like the compounds, right, on Big Love that they talked. Did they get it right? Did they get the compound atmosphere right?
I've never seen Big Love ever, but I'm sure they did. They just don't really. So they focus on the Twin Cities, Colorado City, and Hilldale. Thank you, Hilldale. But there are plenty of sects that still exist further down into Arizona and New Mexico and up in Canada, and the focus isn't really on them as much. But they're even more insular than the Twin Cities are, and that's where some really twisted shit happens. Right,
it's twisted. There's a lot of real atrocities happening to these people. These women, these girls can have sex with these church leaders, not by their choice. And based on my research, these church leaders can have them 12 years old, 13 years old.
The women have no choice in it. They're assigned a husband.
They're not educated past third, fifth grade, something like that.
Most of the times. Luckily, the person I talked to, Esther, she was actually allowed to go to nursing school. And she had to get clearance from Warren Jeffs in order to do that.
Wow.
So, I mean, she had to send, a fax down to Colorado City and say, hey, is it okay? And he, took like a year of time to actually approve it. And then finally she was able to go. But she was also like the town's midwife and the town's nurse.
They
needed one.
Right.
So it's like, of course he's going to approve it.
Yeah.
But essentially higher education is maligned.
Yeah.
Nobody can get higher education.
It's extremely misogynistic. And then it's even worse off for these lost boys who get kicked out of these compounds. They don't have any education. They essentially have band together. They're trying, just imagine you have a 3rd or 5th grade education. You're trying to make it on your own from scratch with no support.
Well, yeah, I think it was 2 or 3 of Esther's sons are loggers.
There you go.
Up in Canada.
Yeah. Ion Hersey had that kind of the same problem coming from Somalia.
I think I just wanted to hit on that because people like to think of Mormonism, funny, just like Scientology, funny. But there's real life consequences to the church.
And it's not just the FLDS. I mean, go on to the ex-Mormon Reddit and read stories. I get emails from people that share their stories because I ask them for it. I want to hear what people experienced and convey it or share it with the audience if they're comfortable doing that. But if you just look on the ex-Mormon Reddit, there are plenty of people just sharing their story, talking about how mindfucked they were into this cult and how much they hate their life for it, and how as soon as they left, they lost all of their family, all of their friends. They were essentially the black sheep that was cast off. I mean, this is a horribly damaging religious cult.
Were you part of there was a major apostasy piece going on there, about 1,000 people or so at Salt Lake City. Did you go to that, or do you know anyone that does? Because it seems like people are banding together to give community, specifically ex-Mormons, to try to, put a little bit of a positive spin on that. It seems like some are getting community that have been kicked out of their former.
Absolutely. And they're unfortunately, so the church has an amazing infrastructure, and I credit the church with giving me a lot of social skills I wouldn't have had unless I had gone to church. I mean, mutual activities where you go and interact with people, your friends, as well as people of the opposite sex. And you from a very young age, they socialize you into the church, but they only socialize you with people that are in the church. So the church has a lot of really good infrastructure and good teaching programs and great sense of community and community watch programs. But when you leave the church, that solid foundation is dropped out from under you, and the only place you can go is online. I mean, luckily, Salt Lake City is kind of a teenage town because there's a lot of people that are coming out of the church. Salt Lake City in and of itself is very low percentage Mormon, but the further you go out from Salt Lake, the higher the percentage gets, the crazier it gets. So when you leave and you just have your entire life's foundation ripped out from under you, you have to meet people, you have to talk to people that have experienced the same thing, or else go fucking crazy.
Well, I think we're going to continue this interview, Bryce, on your show. So everyone out there, keep an eye out for part 2. think we'll get more into the difference between Texas Mormons and Utah Mormons. And
yeah, we're going to jump into some serious history too.
Excellent. I can't
cannot
wait.
Yeah.
You're right. We could go on and on and on like this. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Next week, we will be recording with Armin Navabi, the founder of Atheist Republic. Check that out. It's going to be he's ex-Muslim, started a gigantic ex-Muslim the Atheist Republic.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The more conservative, coming out of also another very conservative religion culture, and I think Mormonism is an equivalent of a sort.
Right.
And I think there's a lot to be learned.
So thank you so much for joining us. Bryce, thank you for being in the studio.
Well, thank you guys all very much for inviting me in. And, of course, the podcast is available anywhere people get Mythicism Milwaukee podcast.
Right.
And
so it's definitely on Stitcher, right?
Yes, definitely.
iTunes, Stitcher.
The website, if you go to nakedmormonism.com, will immediately then actually load the Stitcher if you have the Stitcher app. It's really nice.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And just to let all of the listeners right now know, we have a camera going off in the corner right now, but you only get to see that if you're a subscriber onto the Mythicism Milwaukee Patreon page.
Yes, we're going to upload that. Thanks to Bryce. He's going to give us that file. We'll upload it to Patreon for our patrons.
Yep, and likewise, the video of part 2 is going to be on my Patreon as well.
Excellent.
So, if people do want to see us, sitting in a room bullshitting with each other, be sure to pledge on Patreon.com.
All the hand
both
signals.
of the shows.
Yeah, absolutely. All the hand signals. And yes, thank you to Dennis. He just pledged $1 last week. So thank you, Dennis. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. Look for the video on Patreon. Look for part 2 on Naked Mormonism. We will see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Mythicist Milwaukee Show. The Mythicist Milwaukee Show is brought to you by Mythicist Milwaukee. Producer Sean Freisig, Associate Producer Fritz Blandon, Engineer Jason Lawson, and hosts Brian Edward and Jacob Wolfel. Every week we produce a new broadcast that sheds light on religion, secularism, and mythology. If you enjoy this show, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/mythicist. Closing theme, written and performed by Shelley Siegel.
There was a time when everyone believed Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom, beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility and ether to breathe. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? They're all myths, but who will be the next to die? There was a time when everyone believed Helios in the sun, Poseidon in the sea, Athena's wisdom, beauty, and Hades underneath, Isis of fertility and ether to breathe. They all lie at rest, and who will be the next to die? They are all myths. Who will be the next to die? Okay, got it.